The following program contains content unsuitable for children.
We can't warn you strongly enough. Do you need a doctor of some kind? What is the matter with you?
Bears Bar Room, 100 proof. This show here is dedicated to authenticity and to passion and to the loyal Chicago Bears fans out there. There's no talk about what Joe Madden's doing today or the closer. This is about the Chicago Bears, and it's dedicated to everybody out there that watched in 97 and 98 and saw 4 and 12, and it fucking hurt both years. Or the people that went through that egregiously ineptitude that we had with 3 and 13 2 years ago with John Fox, and you still watched and you still fucking cared. This podcast is for you. 100 proof. Statistical analysis is pondered here. It's respected here. But there's more to it than that. If you want substance, you want things extrapolated and broken down for you, the tape doesn't lie. This is the place for you. It's 100 proof. However, if you're one of these motherfuckers starting these straw man arguments, these keyboard tough guys on Twitter, crutching on your pro football focus, then maybe you should go to one of your micro podcasts. If you're one of these guys that are blatantly uninformed and just repeating what the national media says, whatever the narrative of the day is, hot takes and so forth, even if it is a holiday, even if it is your holiday, and you don't want to be called out and criticized, then this podcast isn't for you either. If you like frauds and phony insiders talking to all their general manager contacts with their crooked fucking eyes, then maybe go to one of those said other micro podcasts. If you want the truth and you want 100% talk about the Chicago Bears, then welcome. This is 100 proof. You will not be disappointed. This is the best goddamn podcast out there. They're about to bring it for you. It's Aldo Gandia. It's Shane, the smartest man. It's Draft Dr. Phil. It's 100 proof.
Hello, Dan Pompei. This is Aldo Gandia with Bears Bar Room, and Shane is with me, and your buddy Draft Dr. Phil.
All right. Well, good to be with you guys today.
Thank you. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to play a little bit of an intro that was produced for you, and then we'll get into our Q&A.
Bears fans and barflies, our guest tonight started at the Chicago Sun-Times in arguably the greatest year for quarterbacks in the history of the National Football League draft, 1983. For 14 years, he served readers the golden Bears nuggets of wisdom that we all craved, until he went on to the Sporting News, where I, along with many of my colleagues, and I'm sure Bears fans worldwide, were able to flip immediately to his stories every week. From there, he went to the Chicago Tribune for 6 years, and then Bleacher Report for 7, and now with the goddamn Athletic, where he forces me to pay for a subscription, unlike John's, because he's worth it. He's a Hall of Fame football writer whom has helped many a Chicago Bears, including the latest, Jimbo Covert, get to where they deserve to be, the National Football League Hall of Fame. You sometimes hear him on The Score. He's the master wordsmith and the volcano. It's Dan Pompei.
Look at that.
That'd make a hell of a ringtone, right, Dan?
Quite an introduction. I don't know how I'm going to follow that up. I think it's going to be a letdown from that. But I'll do my best, guys. Good to be with you today.
Well, thank you very much for being here. This is, of course, Bears 100 Proof, our kind of raucous, rowdy Roadhouse barroom show, and we're really, really pleased that you're joining us this week. We had on Joe Theismann earlier today with Mike North on our Mike North Advantage show, and so I wanted to ask you right away, why isn't Joe Theismann in the Hall of Fame?
Well, I'm going to give you a general answer and tell you that there's a lot of good players out there, very good players who are not in the Hall of Fame because it's very difficult to get into. And, every year, one of the most difficult aspects of the Hall of Fame selection process is kind of winnowing down the list from a very large number to the point where you get to 15 members in the modern era. And I'm also on the senior committee, so we deal with those guys. And sometimes that's even harder because you're talking about guys who've been overlooked for decades. Sometimes, you've got guys with incredible statistics, incredible achievements, honors, that never even have gotten a chance to be discussed. But it's a very elite group, and it's a very elite process, and it's difficult to crack. And sometimes guys do end up not getting their due, at least in terms of getting discussed, I think.
There you go. That's a great general response, and appreciate it.
The Hall of Famer, Dan Pompei. I really appreciate you jumping on with us. You're a historian in the fact, as the intro said, and I disagree with you. I think it's well-deserved, especially on this network where, as I've said before, and Shane can attest, I think he's with me too. I mean, you're the guy before the internet existed that we fans from around the world, went to give us the kind of information that now I would say, patting ourselves on the back, that we're doing in the podcast form of that craving for Bears information. So I've always said this, and I'll say it again before my question, that you are my idol. And I really believe that you are the reason I'm doing this, because of you doing and bringing me that information back then that I so crave. So I thank you for that, and I think that intro for you is well deserved.
Well, that's very kind of you. It means a lot to me that anyone would think that, but if you've been reading me for that long, it just means that you guys are really old.
Well, I am. I'm getting gray.
You got a ways to go before you catch me, though.
Aldo's got you beat. That's all we.
Yeah, I'm the old guy here. I'm 61, so I think I was born actually before you even started writing words to paper.
Well, you got me by a few years. Yes, just a few, not many.
Well, really thinking of the 37 years you've been around this organization, this football team, the charter franchise, I have to ask you, I know Bears fans, and we call our specific show fans barflies, all want to know this question. How, in your mind, I don't want you to leak out of this, how has Ted Phillips been able to be such a constant in this organization with all the flux of GMs and the business partnership that he has with the McCaskies? How's he able to carry through the tough times and all of it?
Well, yeah, he's had a number of different roles through the years. He started out as a team accountant, actually didn't even work for the team, worked for an outside company, and then was employed by the team, and then they ended up hiring him full time, and he ended up being their negotiator for many, many years. That's really when he and I got to know each other pretty well in the 1980s, when he was doing most of the negotiating on contracts and dealing with agents. And then, from there he was put in charge of the stadium situation, some of the bigger picture things after Michael McCaskey's attempt at getting a stadium done failed. And then, Ted was able to get it done with the city of Chicago at the time, and that really put him in a good light with ownership, and I think they feel kind of indebted to him for everything that he did in that regard. And he's now he's the president of the team, which he's not really involved a lot in the day-to-day in terms of what goes on from a football perspective. But he certainly does have an influential role with the team still after all these years.
Dan, do you think that Ted Phillips gets too much of the blame from fans for the lack of success that the organization has had on the football field? He's become kind of the whipping boy for a lot of us fans, but how do you personally feel about whether he is targeted too much?
Well, like I said, he's really not the guy who's hiring the head coach. He's not the guy who's making the picks. He's not picking Leonard Floyd or Kevin White or Mitch Trubisky or whoever it is that pick this year in the draft. So I understand the frustration and the need kind of to try to find someone to vent at, and that's how he gets blamed, and I get that. But really, I think if you're mad about something specifically, there's probably somebody who there's more direct line to blame with, who if there's a pick, like I said, or a hiring, whatever, because he's usually not involved in most of those things, but he oversees it all. So,
Dan, kind of to play off your answer there, in terms of this being the charter franchise, and when you see the Chicago Bears going into the their 101st season, but then the way that they hire people, and like with the outside search firm, and then bringing in Ernie Accorsi, is that something that like bothers you, that has been around this team and covered this team for so long, that there's not one guy in this franchise that's overseeing, even above a Ryan Pace, that's just a pure football guy that's here, where they don't have to step outside of the organization to make such key hires in a franchise like this?
Yeah, I didn't understand that, the need to go and hire an outside consultant. They actually they've done that a couple of times. They did it when they hired Jerry Angelo as well.
Yep.
I think you're talking about a football family in the McCaskies that has been around the game since they all were born. So exactly. I would think that they have the experience and the knowledge to be able to make those hires. But I say this too, all they did with Accorsi was consult with him and ask him his opinions. He wasn't making the hires, and it was the same thing when they hired Jerry Angelo. So I don't know that it's ever a bad thing to get more information and depend on more people for opinions, as long as you have the conviction yourself to hire the people who you think are best for the position.
Has anyone ever approached you? I mean, you've been around this team, this franchise. You've covered Sweetness, McMahon, McMichael. You've covered everybody. I mean, we can get into all of it, but you've been around the heartbeat. You've got the pulse of this team. Have they ever come to you, especially if you draw back the curtains, and Bears fans worldwide should know, Dan has intimate conversations with everybody, from John Madden and Bill Belichick and Peter King to whoever. Dan has interviewed them in the NFL. So you having that kind of pulse, have the Bears ever reached out to you to help with turning this program, the charter franchise, around ever?
No, they haven't. I think there's a separation, between people who write about the team and the people who run the team, that is probably respected by all sides. And I would never expect for them to come to me and ask for my opinion about something like that.
Well, Ernie Accorsi was a former writer and columnist, and then elevated himself into a position where he became, quote unquote, a football guy. That, to me, I've said many a times to the people that I know in my experience, that Ernie is sort of a shoe salesman. And I look at people in the tone and texture of what they uncover and how they articulate their football acumen. And I'm just saying, here you are, Hall of Fame writer, knowing the pulse. We just had, I believe, and I might be off here, your favorite Chicago Bear, I don't think I'm wrong in this, Doug Plank, correct?
Yes, we were asked to write about our favorite players, and I wrote about Doug Plank.
He was on our network, and I came away from the interview that we had with him ready to recognize that's a future head coach of the Chicago Bears, because say whatever you want, Mike Ditka got the piece of what it is that makes the Bears that special. Doug Plank gets the piece that makes this team special. I think you understand that too, and that's why I say that when I look at Accorsi going in there, he might not have hired Ryan Pace or whoever else he was in, John Fox, but he was an influential voice in the room. And you, being the Hall of Fame committee, I mean, your voice is influential in getting people into Hall of Fame. I just think here you are, and I'm not trying to sell you, but I just think that in this perspective, I think you'd be going a long way in helping this franchise. And if it was you, can I ask you who you would hire?
if who I would hire to be general manager, or
both. If you had a choice, say you wanted to turn this around, and this is just coming off the top of my head in this, who would be your general manager?
Somebody who's unemployed right now, or can I
anybody
hire
you want? Anybody you want. Who would be your guy?
I know a lot of people in this business who are really, really good at what they do. I'm going to stick with 3 guys who have worked in this building. Okay.
Yes.
One is Chris Ballard, who I thought, is a guy who probably, when Jerry Angelo was fired, I thought what should have happened is they should have said to Jerry, "Listen, we're gonna make a change. We're gonna start a succession plan. We're gonna keep you for another year or 2, and then we're gonna have Chris Ballard come in and replace you.
Wow.
And you're gonna work with Chris, and after Chris takes over, you could be an advisor to him, whatever." I thought that would have been an ideal scenario to keep the good things going that the Bears had and still bring in a fresh approach and a new voice. So I think he's done a really good job so far with the Indianapolis Colts as well, and he did a good job when he was with the Chiefs as well. Another guy, I think it's always important when you're going through these processes to look at as many different kinds of candidates as you can. So I want to put an African American in my group, and I'm going to look at Morocco Brown, who is the pro director of the Bears, and I think he went to Washington as their personnel director, and now he's with Chris doing college scouting director in Indianapolis. And I think he's a bright young guy in his business who's going to go places. And
Nice.
The third guy I'm going to mention is already in-house, and he's been here for many years, and that's Mark Sadowski. And he's a college scouting director. And I think I wrote a story about him in The Athletic recently. I think he's a pretty special guy who could impact the organization on multiple fronts.
Dan, do you think the reason, when Pace, it really came down to Pace and Ballard, it sounds like, when they were hiring the GM, do you think that was one of the main reasons that Ballard isn't here, because he kind of knew the inner workings of the organization and they didn't want to deal with that?
I think he's not here. I think he's not here because he didn't want to deal with Jay Cutler. That's what I think.
Oh, okay.
I think that, I think the organization was committed to Cutler financially at the time, and Chris Ballard probably would have wanted to go in a different direction at the quarterback position.
How much was Jay Cutler a lightning rod for the organization, for coaches, and even the players? I mean, we've heard stories, guys like Kyle Long have been on our network and spoke highly of Jay, and they would, run through a brick wall. And then we've heard, stories about other players and other people and who just are not Jay fans. So clearly this was a very divisive personality in the organization, huh?
He was, I think, everybody knew what Jay Cutler was when they got him. And, relationships were never going to be his strong point. His strong point was going to be throwing the football. And, they had some tough circumstances with him at the time, with kind of revolving door at offensive coordinator, problems at wide receiver. And I think all that being said, he put them and the team got to be in good position a couple years when they really could have gone places with Cutler. But he obviously got hurt both times. One time was in the championship game, and the other time was, I believe, against the San Diego Chargers, when they really had it going that year, and I thought they had a chance to do well in the postseason. So, I think when you look back at the Cutler move, you say, was it worthwhile to kind of gamble what they did on him? I think it was, but it just didn't work out quite as well as everyone hoped it would.
Speaking of quarterbacks, straight to the point, is Trubisky a bust now based on them signing Nick Foles? I mean, you look around the landscape of the NFL, no other team with a young quarterback they drafted second overall is now in a quarterback competition. So does quarterback competition equal bust for Mitch, or is this a natural path to get the best out of Mitch in your mind?
I don't think you'd call him a bust yet. I think you could say they've been disappointed in him up to this point, or he hasn't quite lived up to the expectations of the second pick of the draft. But I believe that he's got everything in front of him still, and he's got an opportunity to change the narrative. And his future in Chicago, and really the National Football League, is going to depend on how he responds to competing with Nick Foles. And I think, like we talked about with Cutler, too, the circumstances haven't been the best for Mitch either. So I think it's incumbent on the coaching staff and the organization to do more to support him this year than they did last year, because I think there aren't many quarterbacks who could have had a lot of success in the position that Trubisky was in last year, given everything that was going on around him.
Dan, when it comes to Mitch, and I know we all know that Chicago is a tough place to play, but it just, how does it feel like when you're looking at it? Does everything feel like too big for him in a way that it just seems like Mitch really, really takes everything to heart, and especially at quarterback, you have to be able to turn the page. I mean, you've seen I always refer back to the comment when he said, I'm not a guy that reads books, but I started reading books because that's what leaders do. And that made me cringe a little bit, because it was like that was really, really forced, and that's what somebody really told him that he should say or that he should do. And it just, I don't know, do you believe in Mitch as a quarterback yourself, even just as a fan or somebody covering the team?
Well, I think he needs to prove himself still, is what I think. And I believe that, there are some things about his play that are troubling to me. I think how he responds to pressure in the pocket is a little troubling, and then how he reads defense is a little troubling, and his inconsistent accuracy is troubling. But again, can those things be enhanced with a run game, with better play calling, with more rollouts, with more dependable targets, with an offense that's not dysfunctional? I think some of them should be able to. Can they be enhanced to the point where, you think that he's one of the better quarterbacks in the league? I'm not sure. We're going to have to see. I think all of that needs to play out on the field this year, hopefully this year, right, if we have a football season. Yeah.
What's your evaluation of Matt Nagy? And I got to tell you that I've vacillated in my like and dislike with Coach Nagy. In 2018, he comes in here as Coach of the Year, takes the team to the playoffs, and then last year it looks like he can do nothing correct. And to draft Dr. Phil's credit, even in that rookie season that he had with the Bears, Phil was yelling and screaming, saying this guy cannot call a good football game. He just doesn't know how to set up a defense. He's calling this play when he should be calling that play and so forth. I went to a game with him, the Tampa Bay game, where Mitch Trubisky threw for 6 touchdowns and Phil is yelling at the coach. And lo lo and behold, it appears that Phil was correct in his criticism of Coach Nagy. What's your feeling about Coach Matt Nagy as he enters his third year in the NFL as a head coach?
I think, like Mitch, he's got some things to prove, too. You know, I believe that he's done some things really well. I think he has been really good in terms of leadership and creating culture and getting guys to buy in and, you know, kind of looking down at it from 500 feet. You know, I think he's a natural at that. He really has energized the building, and that might not be something that is easy to see from, you know, the upper deck at Soldier Field. But I think, you know, when you're around the team a little bit, it is easy to see that you know, he has been a great culture creator. And I think, you know, in terms of the game planning and the play calling, I agree with you that could be improved and needs to be improved. I don't understand what has gone on with the run game for 2 straight years. And, you know, without that, I think it becomes very difficult to develop a quarterback. And it becomes difficult to keep your defense, you know, as good as it can be and off the field and fresh and hungry and healthy. So I think, to me, that's one of the main things that I'd like to see him do differently is, you know, get a run game going and also, you know, play some good old Chicago Bears power football. You know, the rinky-dinky runs are, you know, they're good for once in a while, I guess. But yeah, I don't think that's the way to make a living myself. Not here in Chicago.
Stay right there, Dan. I mean, how fair is it? I mean, you and your colleagues, and I'm not going to say you, but there's a narrative that's drawn, and to Shane and Aldo's point here with you. It's tough in Chicago to be a quarterback. You look through the history of them from McMahon, Harbaugh, McNown, Miller, all of them facing the fire of the media as well as the fan base. On top of that, with Trubisky being the highest chosen quarterback in the draft since McMahon, how fair is it to assess this guy appropriately, create a narrative as a failure because his peers are in better situations offensively with the offensive line, the running game, and a tight end that's so important to the Nagy scheme? You have none here. How much of this is on Mitch in your mind?
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, the Bears in 1980, I think it was 82. I can't remember right now. They went into the draft, the draft morning, with plans on taking Joe Montana in the second round of the draft, and wow. They ended up changing their plans that morning. Jim Finks changed his plans that morning and took Willie McClendon instead because he felt like he needed a running back in back of Walter Payton. But I often wonder, what would have happened to Joe Montana if he came to Chicago? Would he have been Joe Montana, or would he have been, you know? I mean, I don't know who he would have been. You know, yeah, exactly. You know, it obviously the pairing with Bill Walsh, the pairing with Jerry Rice, and you know that great San Francisco offense was part of what made him great. Same thing with Tom Brady. You know, we've been talking lately. Well, you know, who made the Patriots? Was it Brady or Belichick? Well, obviously it was Brady and Belichick together. It was their chemistry. It was the fact that they worked together so well, and obviously they had other pieces that worked together well during their time as the best team in football. So, you know, it's never quite about just one person. This is the ultimate team sport we're talking about, and I think you know it's unfair to place everything on the doorstep of one person when things go wrong.
Dan, this off season was, I don't know, I guess not really what any of us here at Bears Barroom were kind of expecting the way that it went. I think obviously we knew that they were going to bring in a quarterback, and Nick Foles was very likely with the connection to the coaches and knowing the offense and everything. But Jimmy Graham and putting in the money into Robert Quinn, and we still really haven't seen a legitimate addition on the offensive line. I guess there's a lot of hope, pushing Ifedi inside is going to maybe unlock his future as an NFL player. But has this free agency signing period for you in terms of how the Bears have handled it? Was there any surprises for you, the direction that they took?
I wasn't shocked. I guess I was a little shocked with Quinn. I didn't think they'd be in the market for a pass rusher, of his stature, the kind of salary that he commanded. But I thought that was a good move. I really do, because to me, I don't think you could ever have too much pass rush. And I think his presence should help bring out the best player on the team. That's Khalil Mack. And boy, if you're an opposing offensive coordinator or an opposing offensive line, and you're sitting there on 3rd and long looking at Khalil Mack on one side, Robert Quinn on the other, and Akeem Hicks in the middle, I mean, you're probably going to wet your pants there on the field. So I think they've got something good going there now with that, and I thought it was a good move by Ryan Pace.
Leonard Floyd didn't get that emotion in you?
No, I mean, hey, the reason you drafted Floyd and the reason that you moved up for him in the draft was because you thought he could give you pass rush, because he could disrupt plays and he could get the quarterback on the ground and, get the ball back for the offense. And, they talked a lot about how, he's a decent run defender. He did a lot of things well, but he didn't do what you got him for. So that's why they had to go out and try to rectify the situation and get Robert Quinn.
And that's why I gave him an F for that selection. I want to ask you what you grade Ryan Pace for us. In your mind, you've given such transparency, and you're step for step with me and Shane. I think Aldo as well. I don't know with Ballard, because that's who I thought they were going to hire. And that's who I thought because of the heartbeat. So tonight, honestly, give us your grade for Ryan Pace, the GM of the Bears.
Well, I mean, I've never really thought about a grade, so I don't want to do something without thought. But I mean, I'll tell you this. I mean, I think he's done some things that he'd like to do over, no question. That his first round picks are have been really, really spotty. Going back to Kevin White and Floyd, obviously, I think Roquan looks like he's going to turn into a pretty good football player. Mitch looks like, I mean, he might end up being okay, but certainly, there were better quarterbacks to take with the second pick in the draft, or even the third pick in the draft. So you could certainly beat him up for that, because the first round picks are important. He's done a very good job, I think, in the middle rounds of the draft. He's really come up with some really good value picks. He's gotten really good depth, I think, for this team. And he's done a decent job in free agency, too, where, to find a guy like Akeem Hicks, that's pretty rare. I mean, he's one of the better defensive players in the National Football League. Obviously, acquiring Khalil Mack was a trade, but, I thought that was a fantastic move, too. So, it's really a mixed bag with his record, and I think it's still playing out. So, like we said with Mitch and even Nagy to a degree, his legacy has not been entirely written yet. We're still kind of figuring out where it's going to be with Ryan Pace.
Dan, I'd love your evaluation of this Bears offensive line, and in particular, what you expect Juan Castillo can do as the offensive line coach, and what was the disconnect, do you suspect or know, between Harry Heaston and those players, there was a significant regression in the play of the offensive line under Heaston's second year with the team. And so, what do you know about Castillo, and what can he potentially do to correct the problems with the OL?
Well, to me, I think really what you need are better players, and the coaching only gets you so far. I think Heaston's a pretty good offensive line coach. He's got a long history of having success, and he's had success in Chicago and at Notre Dame, at Tennessee, a lot of different places. I know he's got the respect of people, the great respect of people like Olin Kreutz, who've worked a lot with him, and different players who've gone through the system with him. So Quentin Nelson and guys like that. So, I'm not a big fan of blaming the position coach when things go wrong. A part of it now, they had some injuries last year, obviously. They were depending on Kyle Long to be kind of, one of their most important offensive linemen, and he got hurt early, and they had to scramble and adjust. I think they were hoping that James Daniels would develop at a faster pace than he did. And really, I don't know that any of the offensive linemen played as well as they did the year before. I think again you could look at some of that as game planning and play calling. Did that bring out the best in these guys? Were they asked to do things that suited their abilities the best? I think there's a lot of different ways you could look at that. But I think, Castillo's a guy who has been in the league for a long time, been with a lot of different offensive lines. Last year he was consulting Jim Harbaugh up in Michigan. So he'll bring in a fresh look. Maybe he'll change up the techniques a little bit, and we'll see if the offensive line can't rebound. But I would think that they are going to add at least, one guy who they hope could be a starter in the draft week from now.
Speaking of the draft, Dan, one of the things that I think is really a huge need, along with the offensive line on this team, I mean, you can put cornerback there too, but I really think wide receiver is a glaring need, because I think that there's a whole bunch of questions after Allen Robinson. I mean, Anthony Miller with his shoulder. We don't know what we have in Riley Ridley, Javon Wims, Taylor Gabriel. I mean, he was hit and miss while he was here and is no longer here. But would you be surprised if that was a focus for the Bears at 43 or 50 in this deep wide receiver class?
I think it needs to be a focus.
Absolutely.
And the one thing I'll say, though, you mentioned how deep the class is. It's so deep that you might say, let's address something else up here and get one, maybe in the third round or whatever, because you might, you probably could do that too. But yeah, I think it's a big hole for the team. And, you could even look at it beyond wide receiver and just say offensive weapon to me. Because,
right.
Playmakers.
I know they've got 42 tight ends on the roster, but really, do you want any of them is the question. So, I think you could look at the tight end position too and say, do we have a good young dynamic tight end who we can count on to be here? I know that they just invested in Jimmy Graham, and they have hopes for him for this season certainly. But beyond that, that's a position that needs to be looked at too. But they need a wide receiver without a doubt.
I totally agree. I actually mocked 2 receivers to the Bears and a tight end, Aldo, in Draft Dr. Phil's 3.0 mock. Look at that, a teaser.
That's right. That's coming out soon.
Dan, have you, as a reporter covering this team, ever walked out onto the practice field? Now, I always imagine this, being Dan Pompei as a young Phil, going out and having the team be available to me, and I'm just visualizing this, and now they're fresh off the draft, and you're going out there to their first OTA or rookie minicamp, and you walk out there and you don't have to name the player, but have you ever just said, oh my God, they totally missed on this kid? Like, have you just seen it for your own eyes with all your football years of experience? Just recognized that somebody, again, we could put it into perspective into training camp too, the first day of pads, that you've seen that a football player probably they missed on?
Well, I think sometimes early you see guys struggle because they're not accustomed to what they're dealing with, whether it's, the speed or the size or, the volume of the playbook. Maybe they're not prepared for whatever reason. So you have to be a little careful not to jump to conclusions, because I've seen a lot of players who you think early on are, they're overmatched, and that they make progress over time, because they get in their playbook, or they get in better shape, or they spend more time with their coaches, or they figure it out. I think different players develop at different rates. They come to the NFL at different levels of preparedness, and it's a process for a lot of them. And I think, in some cases, obviously, it takes years. And the rare ones are the ones you see right away, and you say, "Holy cow! This is something special." And there aren't too many of those, because God didn't make too many of them that come in like that and just start dominating from day one.
Was there one guy that you recall that was that?
A guy who came in and started dominating right away?
Yes, that you're like, this guy's an alpha right here.
Let me think back. Well, I just wrote a story about Mark Carrier.
Wow.
It's gonna publish tomorrow on The Athletic. But that was a guy who, came in 1990 and looked like he belonged. He was playing with some good players. The Bears were still a good team back then. They had a number of guys who were, some of them were kind of at the end, but there were still some quality players. And he came in, he started making plays right away. And it was pretty clear that he was going to be a pretty special player. He ended up being a three-time Pro Bowler, Defensive Rookie of the Year, and he had 10 picks his rookie season.
Danny, talk about the 42 tight ends on the current roster. It brings me to somebody that's kind of forgotten because he hasn't been playing much, but I think everybody gets caught up in Trey Burton and missing the playoff game and is pissed about that. But to me, it was kind of justified because he's had 2 surgeries since then. What is your thoughts on the situation with Trey Burton? Do you expect him to be on this roster? Do you think that they're going to be able to get anything from him, or do you think maybe behind the scenes they've kind of moved on from him?
I don't think they've moved on from him yet. I think they've got nothing to lose by giving him an opportunity. They had a lot of conviction in this guy, which is why they paid him so much money. And, he's done some things in spurts, but obviously has not been consistent. So they've got nothing to lose by letting him go out there and compete in training camp and seeing what he can do. If they get Trey Burton hitting on all cylinders, they can end up with a really good football player who could contribute to this team. But if he's the guy who ends up, missing 3/4 of training camp, well, then they might want to consider moving on from him.
Dan, I would like to change the subject to your work with the Hall of Fame committee. First of all, congratulations on your work there, and on behalf of all Chicago Bears fans, want to thank you for shining a spotlight on guys like Jimbo Covert and Brian Urlacher. Covert was a guest on our network twice. The second time he spoke so highly of what you did to shine a light on his career and finally getting him his just due. My question is this. I'm an old TV guy, produced a lot for local television here in Chicago, and I know how the NFL likes to monetize just about everything that they do. What do you think about the idea of doing a reality show about these meetings that you and the Hall of Fame committee have, bringing up players and making the presentations and debating about those players? You think us diehard fans like Shane, Phil, and myself would pay HBO for a series like that? And can you also take us maybe into what that room is like when you're making presentations on guys like Covert?
Well, I could tell you that they have discussed making the whole thing televised, and NFL Network, I know, would love to do it, and I know there are certain people involved in NFL ownership throughout the league who would love to see it done. But I think the Hall of Fame and their board of directors, which is a bunch of businessmen that mostly are in the Ohio area, they believe that there is an integrity to the process that is important, that it remains private, it remains to a level where everyone can speak their mind without fear of repercussions. So they have decided to keep it a private process. It is a fascinating process, I'll tell you that. Every year the meeting is really interesting, and there are a lot of things that go on in there, obviously, that we can't talk about, but I think that there's always healthy debate, and there are some great cases made, and some of the selectors put so much of their time and heart into their presentations and their words and their thoughts that it really is it's an honor and a privilege to be a part of the process.
And quick follow-up to that, I'm not going to ask you for a name or any names, but have you kind of started to identify who perhaps might be the next Chicago Bear or Chicago Bears that you think are deserving? Well,
I think you look at the guys who have been in the pipeline. I mean, Jay Hilgenberg has been in the pipeline for a long time. I'd love to see him get some recognition. He's a guy we've never discussed. Joe Fortunato is a guy even going further back who I'd love to see discussed, who hasn't hardly ever been discussed. I think, and then if you move into some of the more recent times, you've got Olin Kreutz, who's been out there. You've got Briggs, Tillman, and I think the guy who's really got a good case, who might be the next guy to go in, if not for one of the seniors, is Devin Hester. Yes. So he's not eligible yet, but when he becomes eligible, I think he's got a pretty strong case. I don't know that he's going to be a guy who goes in right away, first or second year, because there's never been a return man in the Hall of Fame. But I think eventually his case is so strong that he's got to get in.
That was one of my questions, because there's no return man, and he clearly. Now, my uncle was a special teams coach for 30 years in the NFL, Larry Pasquale, and he even said he's the best I've ever seen. I've never coached this guy. When you have a player like that, Dan, is it an easy sell or is it a hard sell in the fact that there's none in the Hall of Fame? Ray Guy stayed out for years until he finally was in this. Is Hester a Hall of Famer in your mind?
In my mind, no question. I think he changed football games. Opponents could have done to have, contain him when he was on his game. So I think, to me, he definitely is a Hall of Famer, and it's just a matter of time.
Awesome. I have one last question. I don't know how much time you have left. You've given us about 50 minutes. 50, thinking of Mike Singletary. But in your mind, going back to the draft here real quick, do the Bears go quarterback in this draft in your mind?
Oh, I think they have to draft a quarterback in this draft.
Thank you.
I'm a proponent of drafting one every year anyway. I think you need to draft one every year. But especially now, you've got an if in Mitch Trubisky, you've got an if in Nick Foles, and then what do you have? So yeah, I mean, draft a guy, try to develop him, see what happens. I think that was a great lesson that Ron Wolf taught up in Green Bay, is that you draft a quarterback every year and you see what happens. And, he ended up doing it repeatedly, ended up with backups like Matt Hasselbeck and Aaron Brooks and Ty Detmer, guys who ended up starting in the league for other teams. Even if they don't start for you, you can develop them and trade them. Of course, Belichick's done that too with various players. So, I think there's got to be a priority on that. And that's why, too, you need currency on draft day. You can't keep moving up, and you can't keep trading away your picks.
Yes.
Because when you do that, it prevents you from getting those pieces that end up part of your organizational strategy and your ability to make other moves.
I got a follow-up to that. Given that we've seen the team acquire these veteran free agents, Jimmy Graham and Robert Quinn, these are win-now guys. You acquire those guys because you want to win a Super Bowl in 2020. So would that prohibit you, if you're GM, Dan, would that prohibit you from trading up to find another win-now kind of plug-and-play player, either on the offensive line or the wide receiver or any of the other need positions? Would that prohibit you from making that one more sacrifice and losing draft assets to find the guy that can help you win in 2020?
Well, I guess it depends what the sacrifice is, but I mean, if I'm Brian Pace, I'm not trading away any more draft picks. That's for sure. I just think there's got to be a balance. You have to have kind of one hand on today and one hand on tomorrow. One eye on today, one on tomorrow, because you cannot put all your chips on today and just let your organization kind of get to a point where it's decaying in the future. So I think within reason, if it's just money, well, that's okay. But if it's some kind of currency that could help you in the future, I think you have to be careful with that. And, the Bears have given up an awful lot of draft currency, especially, and with the trades of for Mack and for Trubisky and other moves they've made. So I think it's important now, if anything, that you start looking the other way. You start looking at, Foles. You start looking at maybe getting picks back or moving down in the draft, that sort of thing.
Hey, go ahead, Shane.
Well, I was just going to say, while we're on the quarterback real quick, I'd be interested, after Burrow, Tua, and Herbert, is there a favorite of Dan Pompei that you would like to see end up in Chicago, maybe at 43 or 50, if you had your choice?
Which ones did you take off my list? Which ones
I took Burrow, Tua, and Herbert off the list. So that would leave, Love, Jalen Hurts, and Jacob Fromm.
Yeah, I would say, you didn't mention Eason, right?
No, I didn't mention him. No.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's probably going to be gone by the time they get a shot at him, and I don't know that they would take him with their first pick anyway, which you'd probably have to do. But he's probably the best of the remaining ones. It falls off pretty quick.
Yeah, right.
After, you get past Fromm and Eason and, Hurts, there's a pretty big drop off there. Now you're talking about guys who, you're kind of crossing your fingers with. I'll give you one guy who, is not being talked about much, who I think has got some potential, and that's the Hawaii kid, Cole McDonald.
Yep.
He's not a guy you draft. Yeah, not a guy you draft high, but he's got some things about him that I think could end up. He could end up being a developmental guy.
I'll submit my last question here, and again, tell you how much we appreciate you making so much time for us. But just wanted to know, what is it that Dan Pompei is doing during quarantine? Do you have washboard abs now, or are you a borderline diabetic, or are you reading tons of books and stuff? Kind of take us through what you're doing with all this free time.
Yeah, it's kind of life as usual for me. I usually work out of my home anyway. The only thing that I haven't been able to travel because I normally travel quite a bit to do stories. So that's been difficult. It's been an adjustment. I think, I miss, I usually start my day with a 5:30 a.m. workout at the gym, so I miss not going into the gym, but I have at least been able to work out at home. I've been doing some these online classes and, doing what we can do. I think, we all have to just kind of make the best of the situation and ride it out, and hopefully we'll be back to normal life or close to normal in the not-too-distant future.
Well, I have two things, because I'm Italian. My last two things, I'm greedy. One, can I get you to do a station ID for us?
Okay. This is Dan Pompei. You're listening to my boys on Bears 100 Proof.
There you
Look
go.
at that. One take. Hall of Famer. Hall of Famer.
We had Akeem Hicks do it, and he took 3-4 takes.
9 takes. 9.
Well, it would have taken me about 1,000 takes to get to the quarterback like he does. So I can't rip the key.
Touche.
There you go. My last question, Dan, is one off of Aldo's question about COVID-19. In your understanding, could you see, and this comes from our guy, the chat master, or as Aldo refers to, the chatterbaiter, Greg Braggs. He wanted to know, could you see the NFL be playing games come the fall with no one in the stands, no fans in the stands?
Yes, I could. I think they will do whatever they need to do to play games. And if that means that they have to have empty stadiums, well, at least they will have television revenue. I think that is a better alternative for the league than having no games at all. So it's not their number one alternative, obviously. They'd like to be back to normal. But if that's not possible, I think they'll still find a way to have games, even if it's in, a empty stadium. I guess, many years ago, people thought that the NFL would someday be just a game for television anyway. And I think there's been a lot of steps towards that over time. I don't think they'll ever really be able to get away completely from the fan experience of going to the game, because that's still enjoyed by so many. But I do believe it's possible in unusual times like these.
I would relish the challenge as a TV producer to broadcast a game with no fans. You put microphones on everybody. You put cameras where you've never had them before. You just innovate and make something good out of it. So, yes, I would definitely miss the fan experience, and I would prefer being at the game myself than watch it on TV. But I think this if we were forced to it, it'd be a lot of fun to watch a game, and ratings would definitely be up. Everybody's at home watching, so.
That's it. There's always opportunities in unusual times, right?
Absolutely. All right, Dan.
Wow.
I want to thank you very much.
Okay, guys.
Dan,
well, thank you for having me. I enjoyed it.
Yep. Thanks, Dan.
We enjoyed you, man. Thank you so much for coming on Bears 100 Proof with us. You're still my idol.
Thanks so much. That's so kind of you.
Bye-bye.
No, it's bye now, Dan.
Okay, guys.
Bye. Wow, that was great.
Phil with the 6-minute, 12-second question to Dan Pompei.
Did you time it?
Yes, I did.
I was trying to.
I were laughing at you because you're like, you just
saw
kept
Aldo
on
laughing.
going and going and going and going.
I was trying to get him to the point of.
I was going to text Greg Braggs. I'm like, dude, this motherfucker has nothing to you about it.
No.
Oh, my God.
Between
Hey,
Greg,
I got him to the point.
between
I
Greg,
got him.
Berlissimo, and Phil, we've got 3 of the longest questions in the history of podcasting history.
Did I get him to answer that great
Yeah,
Chris
did.
Ballard?
It just took you a long fucking
I
time
was
to
trying to formulate it. I had it written, and I tried to say, fuck the paper. All I see is Aldo cracking
I have it right here on my phone. I fucking texted him. I'm like, Bro, you're at 6 minutes.
I didn't see that till after I asked.
All I'm seeing, though, is Aldo cracking up. I'm like, what the?
Well, we're looking at each other because at one point I thought you were going to stop, and then you're like, well, then, it's great. Dan.
Maybe Aldo should clean it up.
Should I put the sound effects in at 20 minutes later?
Yeah.
2 weeks
really
later.
didn't like this.
Chunk on the
go.
good. And then it's great, Mr. Pompei.